The Monster series on Netflix is a show that's considered to be relatively controversial due to the way that some see it as a show that humanizes the killers, adds in exaggerated parts of the already eccentric and horrific life that they had, and it ultimately makes entertainment out of the horrific events that impacted real people. We're now into the third killer, which was Ed Gein, and if I'm being honest, I thought it was a bit underwhelming due to the promising nature that it had. Since The Dahmer Show was released in 2022, this is a show that I've always looked forward to watching, and there's been things in all of them that's been interesting to compare. So in this video, I'm going to compare the most recent season to the previous ones, rank them, and determine which one is the best. Here is Monster, the Ed Gein Story versus the Jeffrey Dahmer and Menendez Brothers show. The Depiction of the Killers. When it comes to how each of the killers were depicted, I don't think there's much that can be faulted. Evan Peters as Dahmer truly delivered something special with his performance, as his mannerisms, voice, appearance, and behavior felt so sinister, on the mark, haunting, and uncomfortable to watch that I genuinely think it could be one of the best embodiments of one of these killers that I've ever seen. It truly felt like he entered the sick headspace that Dahmer had, and it really translated through the screen. Then when it came to the Menendez brothers, that was a performance that I also thought was really strong. I didn't know as much about the brothers and their behaviors when compared to Dahmer, but I thought they were convincing in their roles, and I remember episode 5 being one of the strongest, and it all being because of the performance. There was also a brotherly bond that was at the heart of their performance, and even right up until the end of the series, you could sense that connection that the both of them had. Then with the Ed Gein story, I'd probably say that this one falls just under Dahmer. You could tell that there was a lot of work that needed to be done with Charlie Hunnam in order to perfect Gein's mannerisms, the sick mindset that he had, but the almost numbed nature to what was going on around him, as Hunnam nailed that feeling of Gein just being caught up inside of his head and not truly being aware of what's going on. The one thing that really does ruin Hunnam's Ed Gein though is the voice that he gave him. It was too high-pitched, it was too soft, and it was extremely slow. So it just became a bit distracting at times, and it took me out of it on several occasions. When Charlie was delivering the scenes when Ed Gein was within his mind, more often than not before he killed, we saw the true darkness that he had within it with the thoughts that he was having, so it was some really strong stuff. He also really looked like him. It could potentially be the strongest casting and makeup work that's been done. I think it's hard for Evan Peters' depiction of Jeffrey Dahmer to be beaten. It was dark, sinister, sickening, and it truly felt like I was watching the killer in front of my eyes. It was one of the most uncomfortable performances that I've seen. The fact that Evan Peters said that it impacted his mind after showed just how deep he went when it came to committing to the character, and that was something that you could really feel when watching it. The tone of the shows. This is where my biggest critique on the shows comes from. There's been a massive transformation in the way that the series has been delivered to us as the years have gone on. When Dahmer first came out, there was a sense of realism to it. It was dark, and it almost had this dirtiness about it. It truly embodied that horrific nature of the crimes that Jeffrey Dahmer committed, and it really got across his mindset. We saw how his childhood impacted him, how his actions truly affected others in the community, and he was genuinely painted out to be this monster. The fact that he was also responsible for killing 17 people made it unavoidable when feeling those things. Plus, the way in which the show was carried out and structured, with each episode almost focusing on a different victim and it cutting forward in time. There was a way of being able to track the time that was going by, and it was relatively easy to follow. This was all about showcasing the full horrors of what Jeffrey Dahmer did, and I just remember feeling so uncomfortable when watching the show. I know it got a lot of backlash in its approach because none of the families of the victims were consulted before the show was made, which was extremely insensitive to do, and there's no fixing that. But in terms of how this story was told and the tone that it had, it was one of a kind. I also thought having scenes from when he was younger and seeing how messed up he was even back then, it just provided a haunting backdrop to the monster even more. I also like the fact that we got the trial, his time in prison, and it just felt like there was a sense of closure to the show. It stayed true to that sense of realism right the way down to the end, and I liked that. Then when it came to the Menendez Brothers show, this was one that also kept things pretty real and upfront, but what the major difference was in this show was that it just felt like it had this glossiness to it. The dirtiness of Dahmer was almost gone, and it felt like it was full of colour and gloss. I don't know whether it was because it was the late 80s and Murphy wanted to capture that feeling, but I think it lost all of its tonal relevance when looking back on it. I also think the likes of Eric and Lyle Menendez can't be compared to killer Jeffrey Dahmer because their acts were completely different, and that's also why I didn't think the show worked as well. The Menendez brothers murdered their parents, which was utterly horrific, but we'd seen the peak of their crimes by the end of the first episode. Whereas with Dahmer, it was constantly building throughout all of it. So after the first episode in this one, it was then mainly centered around what their motive was. With the most recent series, Ed Gein, from a tonal perspective, I think it was a bit all over the place. Maybe the worst when it comes to identity. The first 2 episodes made me think that it was going to be like Dahmer. It was going to be dark, dirty, and really allow us to see inside the mind of somebody that was messed up. However, instead of really focusing on that, it changed and instead started focusing on the influence that Ed Gein had on modern cinema, with the likes of Psycho and also the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies. That was something that I felt took away from the story, but I think it was done because, as I said in a previous video, I don't actually think that the Ed Gein story needed an 8-episode series. Yes, it's confirmed that he murdered 2 people, but the others that were added in there, such as Evelyn and also the 2 men in the woods, were never confirmed, hence why there wasn't actually much of a focus on them. I would have liked to have seen more about how his mind ended up being the way that it was. We caught glimpses of his mother's influence, but I think the show didn't truly get across as strongly as it should have done just how infatuated he was by his mother and how he wanted to be her by the end. The strange serial killer dance party at the end of the finale as he was going into the afterlife was something that was also strange as well. It lacked any realism that I thought it was going to have after the first episode, and I was extremely underwhelmed by the end of it. Especially seeing as though they tried to make us feel sorry for him, just like Murphy did with the Menendez brothers. So when it comes to the tonality of the show, I don't think Dahmer has been able to be beaten. Personally, I don't think the Menendez brothers and Ed Gein needed a TV series. Murphy gave us a glimpse of Gacy in season 1 and also a glimpse of Ted Bundy in the most recent one. These are the monsters that I feel would suit that original tone a lot more. Fans have been saying that they'd like to see the show being made about Richard Ramirez or Son of Sam, and I think those ones would suit that tone too, but it doesn't seem like there's any chance of those being made. The impact of the show. No matter what series you look at, each of these shows have made an impact. The Dahmer Show was breaking records and became the most watched Netflix show ever when it was released, and it got people talking, criticizing, but also praising the likes of Evan Peters a lot. The Menendez Brothers show had a bit of a strange reaction because there became a mass outcry for the brothers to be released from prison, which I thought was rather interesting. And then with the Ed Gein show, it's too early to tell what its large reaction is, but it seems like it's more so about the likes of Charlie Hunnam's performance, but the annoyance at the fictitious elements that were placed within the story of Ed Gein's life, and the inclusion of Adeline, who didn't have a large involvement within reality at all. So this one has definitely caused the least impact. Which one is the best? When taking all of these reasons into account, personally, I think the Jeffrey Dahmer show is the best. In a strange way, it's the killer that felt the most suited to needing a TV series like this about them, and it was the most engaging but also the most horrific one that there's been. Evan Peters' performance has yet to be topped as well. The Menendez Brothers show is probably the second best, just because even though it was more so focused around their motivations, it had us questioning and there were some really strong performances throughout the episodes. So then, in last place, I'd probably say that it's the most recent feature, Ed Gein. Charlie Hunnam was great, but it just felt like there were too many lies that were embedded within it. It didn't have much tonal accuracy, and the constant cutting between Ed Gein, Hitchcock, Tobe Hooper, and Ilsa Koch didn't make it the easiest to digest. Lizzie Borden is the next killer that's going to be featured under the Monster series in season 4. She killed her mother and father, so it's got me thinking that it could be a little bit like the Menendez Brothers show that we had last year, but we'll just have to see. So, there you have it, Monster, the Ed Gein story versus the Jeffrey Dahmer and Menendez Brothers show.